The night they burned his garage to the ground, Marcus Webb knelt in the ashes holding his daughter's bicycle, the only thing the fire hadn't completely consumed, and made a silent vow that would take 8 years to fulfill. If you believe in second chances, in kindness that survives even the darkest nights, hit that like button right now, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House because stories like this one deserve to be told. Before the fire, before the threats, before his world collapsed into rubble and grief, Marcus Webb had been an ordinary man living an ordinary life in the small town of Brackford. He ran a modest auto repair shop on the corner of 5th and Main, the kind of place where everybody knew his name and trusted him to fix their cars at a fair price. His wife had passed 3 years earlier from an illness that took her too soon, leaving him to raise their daughter Sophie alone. Sophie was 7 then, a bright-eyed girl who loved drawing chalk pictures on the sidewalk outside the shop while her father worked, and who believed her dad could fix anything, cars, broken toys, even the ache in her heart when she missed her mother. The trouble started when a crime syndicate calling themselves the Iron Wolves decided Brackford was ripe for expansion. They wanted Marcus's shop, situated perfectly near the highway, as a front for their operations, a place to launder money and stash stolen parts. When Marcus refused their offer, calmly but firmly explaining that his shop was built on honest work and he wouldn't dishonor his late wife's memory by becoming a criminal's puppet, the Iron Wolves didn't simply walk away. They returned with gasoline and matches in the dead of night, reducing 15 years of his life's work to smoldering wreckage. The official police report called it an unfortunate accident, faulty wiring perhaps, though everyone in town knew better. Nobody dared speak the truth aloud. The Iron Wolves had eyes and ears everywhere, and fear had a way of silencing even the most righteous tongues. Marcus tried to fight back through proper channels, filing reports, seeking justice through lawyers who quoted fees he couldn't afford. But evidence disappeared, witnesses developed sudden amnesia, and one by one, the doors of justice closed in his face. Within 6 months, Marcus lost everything. The insurance company found loopholes to deny his claim. The bank foreclosed on his small house when he couldn't keep up with payments. He and Sophie moved into a cramped apartment above a laundromat, where the constant hum of machines became the soundtrack to their diminished lives. Marcus took whatever work he could find, washing dishes, hauling boxes at the warehouse, anything that put food on the table. The proud business owner who once fixed engines with steady, confident hands now came home each night with calloused palms and a spirit bent nearly to breaking. Sophie watched her father transform during those difficult years. The man who used to whistle old tunes while working on customers' cars grew quiet, his laughter rationed like the diminishing contents of their pantry. Yet even in those darkest months, Marcus never let bitterness fully consume him. Every night, no matter how exhausted, he sat with Sophie at their small kitchen table, helping with homework, telling her stories, reminding her that storms eventually pass and that their family's worth wasn't measured by what the Iron Wolves had taken from them. "We're going to be okay," he would whisper to her as he tucked her into bed, though some nights his voice cracked with the weight of uncertainty he carried alone. He couldn't tell her that he sometimes sat in his truck after she'd fallen asleep, gripping the steering wheel, fighting back tears of frustration and helplessness. He couldn't tell her how the Iron Wolves leader, a cold man named Victor Cray, had smirked at him in the grocery store one afternoon, a silent reminder that they were always watching, always reminding him of his place. But something shifted in Marcus during those years of struggle. The same determination that once made him excellent at his trade now redirected itself toward survival and eventual reckoning. He began reading everything he could find about business, about law, about the mechanics of power and how legitimate enterprises could shield themselves from corruption. He worked double shifts and saved every spare dollar, no matter how small. He enrolled in night classes at the community college, studying business administration after Sophie went to sleep, his eyes burning with exhaustion but his resolve never wavering. 3 years after the fire, Marcus had saved enough to open a tiny repair stall at the edge of town, far from the Iron Wolves' usual territory. It was barely more than a shed with 2 lifts, but it was his, and he poured himself into rebuilding what they had stolen. Word spread slowly about his exceptional skill and honest pricing. Customers who remembered his old shop sought him out, grateful to support a man who had survived such injustice. Sophie, now 10, helped sweep floors and organize tools after school, her small presence a constant reminder of why her father refused to give up. The Iron Wolves noticed his resurgence, of course, but Marcus had learned caution. He kept his operations quiet, his ambitions hidden beneath a veneer of humble struggle. He partnered with a retired judge's son who had connections in regulatory enforcement, slowly building a network of allies who shared his hunger for justice against organizations like the Iron Wolves. He documented everything, every threat, every suspicious transaction he discovered, every piece of evidence that local corruption had allowed to slip through cracks before. 5 years after the fire, Marcus's small shop had grown into a respected regional chain of 3 locations, employing over 20 people, many of whom were others who had been wronged by the same syndicate that had destroyed his life. He had become something the Iron Wolves never anticipated, not just a survivor, but a strategist. He used his growing financial resources to fund investigative journalism that finally exposed Victor Cray's operations to state authorities. He testified, this time protected by federal witness programs that hadn't existed or hadn't been accessible to him during his darkest days. He helped other small business owners who had been targets of similar intimidation, becoming a quiet but powerful advocate for those without voices. By the 7th year, the walls Victor Cray had built around his criminal empire began crumbling under the weight of accumulated evidence, much of it gathered through Marcus's patient, methodical efforts. Federal indictments followed. The Iron Wolves, once feared throughout the region, scattered as their leadership faced prosecution. Marcus never sought violent revenge, understanding that true justice meant ensuring these men faced consequences through the very system that had once failed him, now strengthened by his persistence and the alliances he had carefully built. When the verdict finally came down, sentencing Victor Cray and his top lieutenants to decades in federal prison, Marcus stood outside the courthouse with Sophie, now 15 years old, beside him. She had grown into a thoughtful young woman who had watched her father transform tragedy into purpose, who understood now why those difficult years had mattered, why his quiet determination during their hardest moments had been its own form of heroism. The cameras flashed, reporters asked for statements, but Marcus simply held his daughter's hand and looked toward the sky, thinking of his late wife, hoping she could somehow see that their daughter had grown up safe, that the man she had married hadn't broken despite everything thrown against him. The new headquarters of Webb Automotive Group, now spanning 12 locations across 3 counties, stood proudly where his original shop once burned to ashes. Marcus had rebuilt it specifically on that same lot, a deliberate choice, a monument to resilience rather than defeat. Sophie's old bicycle, the one salvaged from the fire, sat restored in the lobby, a quiet reminder to every employee and customer of where this journey began and how far determination could carry someone who refused to surrender their dignity. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to comment below and let us know what part moved you most. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might need this same hope today. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask something special from you. If you've ever faced your own Iron Wolves, your own moments where everything seemed lost, comment the word rebuilt below. Let's create a community of people who understand that destruction isn't always the end of the story. Marcus Webb often told his employees, especially the young ones just starting their careers, that the fire which destroyed his garage had also burned away everything unnecessary, leaving only what truly mattered, his daughter's safety, his integrity, and an unbreakable resolve to ensure no other family in Brackford would suffer what the Iron Wolves had inflicted upon his own. He had returned not with anger or vengeance as his foundation, but with patience, wisdom, and an army of allies built through years of quiet, determined rebuilding. Where the Iron Wolves had wielded fear and destruction, Marcus had ultimately triumphed through something far more powerful and lasting, the simple, unbreakable love of a father determined to give his daughter a future worth inheriting, and a community finally freed from the shadow that had darkened it for far too long.